archaeology. History of archaeology starts with the men's curiosity of knowing the past. In most of societies, men's curiosity of understanding the past has been satisfied with myths and legends. In certain societies, there are some reliable written records and visible monuments providing a chronological framework and information about what had happened in the past. Sometimes this could not give complete picture of the past. Human interest in unrevealing or understanding their past gave a good thrust for locating, collecting and interpreting artifacts of their ancestors. This curiosity laid a foundation for archaeology. Men's quest for understanding the past had a long story. In this long history, archaeology passed through different stages of development. These developments, both in methods and techniques, have been traced in this chapter. The history of archaeology is generally understood as the history of great discoveries like the tomb of Tutankhamun in Egypt, the lost Maya cities of Mexico, prehistoric human remains of Olduvai in Tanzania, and the great city of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro of Indus Valley civilization. These monuments and artifacts were used to forge the identity of the nation. The ancient places like Jerusalem, Kushinagar, River Saraswati, Ayodhya, Dwarka, Pumpuhar, and Patliputra serve as a source of information to project nations' glorious past. Such interests have a strong religious, political, and social component. However, they play in an indirect role in preserving the great monuments and antiquities. For instance, a collection of ancient Babylonian artifacts including inscription amazed by Bel Sastri Nennar, a daughter of King Nabonidus in the 6th century BC, has been considered as the first known museum of antiquities. Sima Qin, the first great Chinese historian of 2nd century BC, visited ancient ruins and documented those things in his work. CZ, such systematic study of the past was valued and used for national integration by stressing the common cultural heritage. Islamic, Christian, Buddhist and Hindu tradition are being used to show the common entity. Even language and traces are being used to integrate certain groups of people. These individuals and states started showing interest in the physical and literary remains of the past, which could reflect their culture, ethos, the religious scriptures and chronicles like the Vedas, Puranas, Mahavansa and Bible are being used to influence the interpretation of archaeological data. For instance, on the basis of biblical genealogy, medieval Christians believed that the antiquity of the world was very recent. Rabbinical authorities estimated that the world had been created about 3700 BC, while Pope Clement VIII dated the creation to 5199 BC, and finally the 7th century Archbishop James Ussher was to set it at 4004 BC. They believed that the present world would end with the return of Christ. The in Hindu tradition, God Brahma created the world and the world would end with Kali Yuga. Likewise, there are also several views on the creation of humanity. According to Christianity, humanity was created by God in the Garden of Eden and spread from there to other parts of the world in two waves, first after the expulsion of the original humans from the Garden of Eden and again following the Noah's flood. The second dispersal was hastened by the differentiations of languages. In Hindu tradition, the creation is viewed differently. The first king of India was Manu, Swambhu, the self-born Manu, born directly of the god Brahma. He had two sons and three daughters from whom descendants a series of Manus, one of them called Prithu, became the first consecrated king of the earth and gave the earth her name Prithvi. When the great flood occurred, everything was submerged and only Manu, his family and seven sagas survived. So the human race spread from Manu and his family. Each event is interpreted as the recent results of God's predetermined interventions and a struggle between God and evil. Such views influenced the thoughts of archaeologists. Few excavations were undertaken solely to prove or disprove certain ideas expressed in the religious scriptures. However, the rapid social, economic, and technological development marked the change in their thinking due to growing familiarity with the historical and literary texts. Thanks to the decipherment of various scripts of the world, archaeologists came to realize that the past was separate from present and different from it. They realized that each period in the past had to be understood on its own terms and that the past should not be judged by the standards of the present. This led to the study of artifacts in different angles. The appreciation of antiquity was not restricted to literature but rapidly extended into the field of art and architecture. The appreciation of art and architecture paved the way for the development of classical archaeology. Classical archaeology. The appreciation of classical antiquity located monuments in late 14th century AD. Critics of Ancona, who traveled in Greece and Mediterranean for 25 years for documenting the archaeological monuments, collecting books and documents and copying the inscriptions, is considered to be as the first archaeologist. Unfortunately, his 6 volumes of commentaries on inscription were destroyed in a fire in 1514. For a long time, there was hardly any excavation in the modern sense but merely digging in the search of objects. The excavation of Roman site at Herculaneum and Pompeii, laying at the foot of Mount Vesuvius in the Bay of Naples, Italy, are of the sort only. The landowner under which Pompeii was buried due to the eruption of nearby Vesuvius in August 79 AD rented the right to entrepreneurs to dig there by cubic yard. It evoked great interest in classical antiquity among the nobles. This interest gradually spread throughout the Europe. The members of royal families started collecting antiquities through different agents. For instance, the Duke of Buckingham, Charles I, and the Earl of Arundel were rivals in importing such artwork during 17th century. This way, antiquities started accumulating in private hands. The The accumulated classical art objects were placed for investigation. This led to the establishment of art history as a separate branch. German scholar Johann Winckelmann's work History of Ancient Art 1764 provided the first periodization of classical art. This classical study provided a model for the development of Egyptology and Assyriology. The people did not know the ancient civilization of Egypt and the Near East until late 18th century, except what had been recorded about them in the Bible and by the ancient Greeks and Romans. The systematic investigation of ancient Egypt began with observation made by the French scholars who accompanied Napoleon Bonaparte's invasion of Egypt in 1798 to 1799. They produced the multi-volume description del Egypte in 1809. It was during the French occupation. The bilingual inscription engraved with Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic scripts on a black basalt stone was discovered by one of the officers of Napoleon in 1799, placed as a part of fort at Rashid near Alexandria. This world-famous Rosette stone, presently housed in the British Museum, helped to crack the ancient Egyptian script by Jean-Francois Champollion in 1822. At the same time, circus performer Giovanni Belgioni and the agents of French Consul General Bernardino Drovetti plundered the Egyptian tombs and temples to display in France and Britain. This plundering, however, was halted by French Egyptologist Auguste Mariette in 1858 after getting appointment as a conservator of Egyptian monuments. The beginning of Mesopotamian archaeology also goes well with the beginning of Egyptian archaeology, although reports of cuneiform inscriptions reached Europe as early as 1602. The first successful attempt to translate was made by George Grotefend in 1802. It was in the year 1849 that Henry Ravelson succeeded in deciphering the long trilingual text that the Achaemenid king Darius I had carved on cliff of Bistuin, also Behistun or Bisotun. In Iran, this decipherment provided the means to unreveal the history of ancient Babylonia and Assyrian and an outline chronology of Mesopotamian civilization was established. The progress in the study of Egyptology and Assyriology became manifold with these decipherments. Such progress also was noticed in China during Qing dynasty and in Japan during Tokugawa period. However, India did not witness such a situation. It was only during the colonial period that the interest on the monuments was developed. Irrespective of the great discoveries and decipherments, the text-added archaeology did not allow the scholars to push the age of the earth beyond biblical year of 4004 BC. Even the artifacts and monuments were associated with certain rulers or with their ancestors. For instance, Geoffrey of Monmouth stressed England's earlier British rather than its Anglo-Saxon past in order to please his Norman masters. His associated Stonehenge with Arthurian legend, German megalithic graves were often associated with Huns who invaded Europe in the 5th century AD. Even prehistoric remains were also associated like this. However, this trend could not continue longer. The decline of feudalism, the development of national states, growth of patriotism, and progress in science included the people to examine the antiquities, artifacts, and monuments beyond the biblical age. Antiquarianism is the study of antiquities in orderly manner to establish its age and function with a specific scientific input of that time. Systematic antiquarian research developed in Scandinavia rather than in other parts of Europe as parts of political rivalry that followed the separation of Sweden and Denmark in 1523. Johan Bohr, Swedish civil servant, and Ole Worm, a Danish medical doctor, respectively encouraged by Gustavus II Adolphus of Sweden 1611 to 1632 and by King Christian IV of Denmark 1588 to 1658, started documenting large monuments with late Iron Age inscription. This guided the archaeologists to focus on prehistoric period from classical period and in turn led to the establishment of museum and royal collections. National laws were passed to protect ancient monuments. The surrender of valuable finds to the king in return for reward was encouraged through this law. Unfortunately, antiquarian research was declared due to the slowdown of the economy in both Sweden and Denmark by the end of 17th century. The attention to the prehistoric monuments was revived in the 18th century with the identification of monuments associated with Celtic inhabitation, the Indo-European language-speaking people in the later part of 18th century. A growing interest to demonstrate the cultural achievement of the Celts, who were recognized as the ancestor of the French, encouraged the study of pre-Roman times to develop independently of classical archaeology. Such developments also emerged in other parts of the Europe. The nationalism fever encouraged more fanciful speculation than sober investigations. In the absence of written records, no system was developed to date the prehistoric artifacts anywhere in Europe. This ultimately contributed little to the development of archaeology. The European colonization in the 17th century led to the contact of the people in other parts of the world. They came across the people who had lived in non-metallic world. Description of these peoples and their custom circulated in Europe created some awareness about different societies and helped to realize that the stone tools found in Europe had been manufactured by human beings. Scholars also realized that stone tools were probably used before metal. The recognition of pre-metal age helped to establish prehistory. Later, they also started or inclined to believe that the technologically less advanced people that they were encountering in various parts of the world as survivals of primordial human condition rather than as products of degeneration. However, without adequate chronological controls and lack of understanding of the evolutionary view of human history, a strong religious faith, or sanctions made by many antiquarians reluctant, reluctant to challenge it. Irrespective of this, the realization of Stone Age and Metal Age paved a way for the development of three-age theory. Three-age theory. The three-stage technological sequence in the first historical scheme widely used in archaeological interpretations. Scholars believe that the prehistoric society developed progressively through age of stone, bronze, and iron technology. The Greek writer Hesiod, about 800 BC, in his epic poem Works and Days, envisaged five stages, namely Age of Gold, Age of Silver, Age of Bronze, Age of Epic Heroes, and Age of Iron. However, the Roman philosopher Titus Lucretius Carus, 1905 to 55 BC, was the one who advanced this three-age concept in his poem De Rem Narun on the nature of things. He suggested that implements were made in stone first and followed later by bronze and iron. However, it remained as a speculative scheme at that time. Again, Michael Marchetti, 1541 to 93, a physician to Pope Clement VII, suggested in his work Metallohetica that before the use of iron, a stone tool might have been used. In line of this thinking, Nicholas Maudel in 1734 set out the idea of successive ages of stone, bronze and iron as a human development. This three-age concept was repeated throughout the 18th century but remained only as a thought. The leading philosophers like Montesquieu, Turgot, Voltaire discarded the other challenges the medieval formulation on human development. They felt that all human beings are equal, laws governing nature was universal and eternal. God was viewed as existing part of the universe. This thought encouraged the people to look into the past afresh. Finally, this three-age theory, which was only on thought till this time, was established by Danish scholar C.J. Thomson 1788 to 1865 as a system of successive human development through archaeological remains. The growing influence of cultural evolutionary thought during the 18th century challenged the face of the antiquarian research and paved a way for scientific archaeology. Scientific archaeology, the development of systematic study of archaeological finds on scientific line started in the middle part of 18th century. It had two movements, the first obtained in Scavendia and the second one in England and France. The invention of seriation and stratigraphy techniques for dating archaeological finds advanced. The prehistoric archaeology, the major concern of the scientific community to understand the origin of the human, led to the hitherto unknown depths of human history. The 3S system. The Danish scholar C.J. Thomson, 1788 to 1865, was invented in 1860 by the Danish Royal Commission for the Preservation and Collection of Antiquities to catalogue the findings for exhibition at Copenhagen University Museum. Thomson was aware of the Lucretius' three-age scheme, and he also knew that biblical and classical texts were suggesting that bronze had been used before iron. By keeping this in mind, he started classifying the prehistoric remains of the museum. He was aware that certain stone tools continued in Bronze Age, continued certain bronze tools in Iron Age. Therefore never attempt to sort the material mechanically, rather he analyzed the material based on the style, decoration, shape and context. This helped him to differentiate the material within the specific period. Though his arrangements were opened in the public as early 1890, his guidebook to Scandinavian antiquity appeared only in 1839, which later appeared in English in 1848 with the title A Guide to Northern Antiquities. Based on material, he classified them into a Stone Age, a Bronze Age, and Iron Age. Scholars found the usefulness of the system throughout Europe and later it became popular. Scandinavian archaeology. The 3S system established the principle that the studying and classifying human artifacts that could produce a chronological ordering. Thomson's works laid the foundation stone for Scandinavian archaeology, the interdisciplinary study carried out in kitchen maidens, supported by Royal Danish Academy of Sciences, by the prolific field workers, and the first professional prehistoric archaeologist J.A. Warshay. Biologist Sten Strip and the father of Danish geology, J.S. Forshammer, certainly established the Thomson 3S system in stratigraphical sequence. The archaeology that was developing in Scavendia provide a model for work elsewhere. This helped to place the prehistoric material in well-defined relative chronological strata. Scandinavian archaeologists could not advance further in the case of prehistory as their land was always under glacial covering during most part of the year. They hardly get any material or site prior to Holocene period. The prehistoric archaeology pioneered by the Scandinavian archaeologists was largely ignored by the British and French antiquarians. Their conservative attitude prevented the birth of prehistory in Britain and France until the middle part of the 19th century. However, it developed in France and England independently of Scandinavian archaeology. Antiquity of mankind. The development of prehistoric archaeology depended on the emergence of an evolutionary perspective in geology and biology, particularly in paleontology. In the first half of the 19th century, geologists, biologists, and archaeologists encountered human physical remains and stone tools associated with the bones of extinct animals in a stratified deposit in many parts of the Europe. It was the French custom inspector Brosser de Parthes, working in the gravel quarries of Somme River in 1841, who published a convincing evidence for the association of human artifacts, prehistoric tools, and the bones of extinct animals. With this discovery, the biblical notion of the creation of the world in 4004 BC was questioned and led to a widely agreed belief that human origins extended far back into the remote past. The outstanding publication of English geologist Charles Lyell's 1797 to 1875 Principles of Geology, Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species published in 1859, and Herbert Spencer's 1820 to 1903 Evolutionary Approach to Scientific and Philosophical Problems revolutionized the thinking of the contemporary scientific community. According to Darwin, in the struggle for existence, environmentally better adapted individuals of a particular species would survive, whereas the less well adapted ones would die. The surviving individual would pass their advantageous traits by heredity to their offspring, and gradually the characteristics of a species would change to such an extent that a new species emerged. In Darwin's words, the underlying essential mechanism was natural selection or the survival of the fittest. These conceptual work induced the scholars to begin their search for human origins by the techniques of archaeology even before the publications of Darwin another great work, The Descendant of Man in 1871. Darwin's concept of natural selection was accepted by many scientists and members of the public was as providing mechanism that made it possible to believe that a process of biological evolution accounted for modern species and explained the change observed in paleontological record. The obvious implication is that man is evolved from ape-like primate. This made the antiquity of human species a burning issue, and prehistoric Paleolithic archaeology acquired a high-profile role in the study of human mankind. Prehistoric archaeology, the term prehistory itself came into the use after the publication of John Lubbock's book Prehistoric Times in 1865. He divided the Stone Age into Old Stone Age, Paleolithic, and the Neolithic based on the tools which are chipped in former and grounded and polished in the latter. Influenced by the evolutionary theory, archaeologists started looking into the stone tools and the associated fossil remains that are found in different geological contexts to understand the evolution of man and try to place them in a chronological order. The Scandinavian, the Scandinavian archaeologists were involved in identifying the cultural evolution of the man, whereas the French and British archaeologists devoted much of their time in identifying the antiquities of mankind. This approach could be seen in Eudord Lartet 1801 to 71 and Gabriel de Mortillet works. Paleolithic archaeology, however, aroused great public interest because it revealed the hitherto unexpected antiquities of humanity. It also set new standards for stratigraphic analysis in archaeology. Paleolithic archaeology enjoyed great prestige because of its close ties with geology and paleontology. Different stages for human evolution were established. A distinctive culture evolution was framed. Racism. One of the main problems that had confronted cultural evolution, if cultural evolution from the beginning was to explain why some societies had developed rapidly while others apparently had remained static over thousands of years. Environmental factors have been attributed for the disparity, but scientific environmental explanation could not be given at that time to convince the people with conservative outlook. Belief in the inequality of races gained scientific credibility as a result of Darwinian evolutionism. Thought Darwin vehemently opposed this mistreatment. His human evolution provided a space for racial interpretation. The conservative regimes established After the defeat of Napoleon in France, Germany and Italy encouraged the romantic nationalism rather than rationalism. The theory of racism had its seeds since the 12th century. French Calvinist librarian Isaac de la Pereire raised it as a major issue in 1655. He argued that the biblical Adam was the ancestor of the Jews alone, while ancestors of other human groups had been created separately. In 1774, Edward Long argued that Europeans and Negroes were separate species. Morton believed that God had differentiated the races after he had created a common community, and this position was endorsed by Louis Agassiz, Jewish, Josie C. Knott, and George R. Gildon, and in their book Types of Mankind. However, belief in the inequality of races gained scientific credibility as a result of Darwinian evolution. Some of them even believe that the intellectuals are more fair in color, which the gradually changes according to the degree of the intelligence. This way, Darwin's theory was misread and misinterpreted to suit their end. Among the scholars who placed the racism with archaeological input was John Lubbock, 1834 to 1913, the Lord of Avebury in England. His two books, Prehistoric Times, as illustrated by ancient remains and the manners and customs of modern savages, 1865, and the second book, The Origin of Civilization and the Primitive Condition of Man, 1870, went through several editions. He advocated that as a result of natural selection, human groups had become different from each other not only culturally but also in their biological capacities to utilize culture. He believed that technologically less advanced people are culturally and intellectually more primitive than civilized ones. This emphasizes the allied superiority of the Europeans over the human groups. This increased the confidence of the Europeans, particularly British. They felt that it is their right to rule. The technologically and culturally less developed people, or one can say they have a capacity to educate the less cultured people. It also helps to give better justification for their rapid colonization and to establish political and economic control on the ground over the native people. Lubbock's synthesis also made a greater impact in America, Africa, and Australia. It influenced the interpretation of archaeological data in many parts of the world by promoting a sense of ethnic identity. It played a significant role in the unification of Germany in 1871 and afterwards by expressing the pride of Germans. This approach was challenged in the late 19th century by growing nationalism and declining faith in the benefits of technological process. A concern with historical and ethnic problems led the archaeologists to pay increasing attention to the geological distribution of distinctive types of artifacts and artifacts assemblage. This led to the formulation of theories like cultural historical archaeology, processual, post-processual, and behavioral archaeology in the 19th century, which were discussed in chapter 4. थैंक यू एवरीवन। इस तरीके से ये सेकंड चैप्टर समाप्त होता है। मिलते हैं फिर अगले वीडियो में, अगले चैप्टर में कल। थैंक यू।